Chapter Profile. The content in this chapter should be relevant to about 18% of all questions about biology on the MCAT. This chapter covers material from the following AAMC content categories: 1D, Principles of Bioenergetics and Fuel Molecule Metabolism; 2A, Assemblies of Molecules, Cells, and Groups of Cells within Single-Cellular and Multicellular Organisms; 2B, The Structure, Growth, Physiology, and Genetics of Prokaryotes and Viruses. Introduction. The human body contains approximately 30 trillion cells, with bacterial cells slightly outnumbering eukaryotic cells at about 1.3 to 1, according to recent estimates. Our cells create tissues that form organs, and each cell serves a purpose, communicating with other cells and carrying out the reactions that make life possible. The sheer number of cells that make up the human body is not nearly as impressive as the wide range of functions these cells can perform, from the conduction of impulses through the nervous system that allow for memory and learning, to the simultaneous contraction of cardiac myocytes that pump blood throughout the entire body. In order to understand the human organism as a whole and how the human body reacts to various pathogens, a thorough understanding of cell biology is required. It is not enough to simply memorize each part of the cell. The MCAT requires an understanding of how each cell structure carries out its functions and how those functions affect the entire organism. MCAT expertise. This chapter represents 18% of all biology questions you would see on test day. That makes the cell, specifically eukaryotic cell structure and function, one of the single highest yield subjects within any of the review books. Make sure to work sufficient study of these materials into your study plan. 1.1 Cell Theory Learning Objectives. After Chapter 1.1, you will be able to recall the 4 fundamental tenets of cell theory. Prior to the 1600s, organisms were perceived as being complete and inseparable into smaller parts. This was due in part to the inability to see smaller structures through simple optical instruments such as magnifying glasses. In 1665, Robert Hooke assembled a crude compound microscope and tested its properties on a piece of cork. He noticed a honeycomb-like structure and compared the spaces within the cork to the small rooms of a monastery, known as cells. Because cork consists of desiccated, non-living cells, Hooke was not able to see nuclei, organelles, or cell membranes. In 1674, Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the first to view a living cell under a microscope. Later researchers noted that cells could be separated and that each cell was a distinct structure. Further research indicated that tissues were made of cells, and that the function of a tissue was dependent upon the function of the cells that make up the tissue. 2 centuries later, in 1850, Rudolf Virchow demonstrated that diseased cells could arise from normal cells in normal tissues. Bridge Robert Hooke, who invented the first crude microscopes to look at cork, is also known for his characterization of springs. Hooke's law, F equals minus kx, describes the relationship between elastic force, the spring constant, and the displacement of a spring from equilibrium. While Hooke's law does not appear on the official MCAT content lists, the related topic of elastic potential energy, U equals 1/2 kx squared, is testable content. This equation and other forms of energy are discussed in Chapter 2 of MCAT Physics and Math Review. The original form of the cell theory consisted of 3 basic tenets. All living things are composed of cells. The cell is the basic functional unit of life. Cells arise only from pre-existing cells. Through advances in molecular biology, a 4th tenet has been added to the theory. Cells carry genetic information in the form of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. This genetic material is passed on from parent to daughter cell. Cell theory has created an interesting dilemma with respect to viruses. Viruses are small structures that contain genetic material but are unable to reproduce on their own. This violates the 3rd and 4th tenets of cell theory because virions can only replicate by invading other organisms and because they may use ribonucleic acid, RNA, as their genetic information. Therefore, viruses, discussed later in this chapter, are not considered living organisms. Bridge solutions to concept checks for a given chapter in MCAT Biology Review can be found near the end of the chapter in which the concept check is located, following the concept summary for that chapter. MCAT Concept Check 1.1. Before you move on, assess your understanding of the material with this question. What are the 4 fundamental tenets of the cell theory?